Hi, I'm Amanda Jane Woodall and welcome to my fashion school. Known as the first ever British supermodel and the face of 66, let's take a look at the rapid rise of fashion icon Twiggy. Lesley Hornby was born on September the 19th, 1949, and she was the third child of William and Nellie Hornby. And her father, he worked as a shop fitter, and her mother worked in Woolworths, and she lived with her sisters Shirley and Vivian in Neasden, North London. She had a happy childhood, although sadly her mum did suffer with PTSD, so her sisters would step in to help raise her, and her dad would take them on lots of trips to the museums and the theatres of London. She attended an all-girls school and her mother taught her to sew, which gave her ambitions to work in the fashion industry. And she loved to make crazy clothing inspired by her heroes, Jean Shrimpton and the Beatles. She discovered the fashionable clothing line Bieber when she got a Saturday job at Mr. Vincent's hairdressers, and her and the other junior, they would run on their lunch break to Bieber to buy kind of fashionable teenage clothes for only £2 or £3. At Mr. Vincent's, Lesley worked with a hairdresser named Tony Davies, and he had an older brother named Nigel who Twiggy started dating because he had a car and this kind of impressed her. And Nigel was very flamboyant, he was fancy, he spoke in a fake upper class accent and went by the name Justin de Villeneuve. And him and his brother would tease Twiggy. They called her Sticks and they called her Twigs, and eventually the nickname Twiggy stuck. Twiggy had ambitions of being a model, and Justin took on the role as her manager and managed to get her a casting with The Woman's Mirror. And Twiggy had been making her own statement with her looks by creating an eye makeup look specifically for herself, which was heavy eyeliner, lots of pairs of fake lashes, and she drew tiny little lashes underneath her eyes, which would go on to be very famous. And the editor of Women's Mirror really liked her look. She thought she was interesting, but she told her, you need to go and get a haircut. So she sent her to the very posh salon, House of Leonard in Mayfair. Upon meeting her, the manager, Leonard Lewis, wanted to completely transform her hair and give her a boyish pixie crop, and Twiggy wasn't overjoyed with this idea, but she was just too shy to say no. You see, Leonard had been developing the idea of short haircuts for teenage girls as he was worried about the damage they were doing to the hair when they were backcombing it into beehives. And so he sent her to Barry Latigan, who was his photographer, to see if she looked good on camera. And at first, Barry wasn't impressed by Twiggy. He didn't really see anything special about her until he got her behind the camera and realised she had an enigmatic energy. And this dramatic haircut had taken 7 hours of cutting and dyeing, and the results of the photo shoot went on to be some of the greatest fashion photography of all time. But Twiggy didn't know this. She'd secretly bunked off school, so she just quickly went back to school and just forgot about the whole thing. So the House of Leonard was a well-known salon used by celebrities and media executives, and one of his clients was Deirdre McSharry, who was a journalist for the Daily Express. and she was very struck by the picture of Twiggy that was now hanging on the salon wall, and she was desperate to know who is the girl in the photo. And Leonard just told her, oh, it's just a schoolgirl, nothing interesting, but she was absolutely persistent that she wanted to meet Twiggy because she was looking for the face of this new generation. Twiggy was called and given an interview with the newspaper, and she didn't really even know what an interview was. She just went along and had a cup of tea, and she expected to have a tiny article in the paper all about her haircut. But actually, Deirdre McSharry catapulted Twiggy into stardom. She labelled her the face of 66, and there was a double-page spread in the centre of the newspaper that was seen by the entire nation. Twiggy mania went absolutely wild alongside the Beatles, Youthquake, the Rolling Stones, and the birth of the teenage generation. She was very much part of the swinging 60s revolution. Everyone became obsessed with Twiggy's look. She had three defining features. She had very large made-up doe eyes. She had a very, very slim, tiny figure. And she also had the short, boyish haircut. But the modelling industry of that time was a fearsome and strict place where everybody shouted at you, and a lot of people speculated that Twiggy was actually a boy and even asked to see her changed to prove it. This look was very fresh. It hadn't been seen before because before models had to have a very ample bust to gain the attraction of an audience, and they didn't wear clothing that showed anything below the waist, so having a bosom kind of gave you a focal point for the clothing. But now miniskirts were in fashion, so the legs became the focal point for fashion magazines. She contrasted the legacy of the 1950s housewife because she was very childlike and androgynous, and she won Woman of the Year in 1966, even though she wasn't even an adult. Twiggy became the most photographed woman in the world, and she worked on clothing editorials, she worked for teenage magazines, and she worked with some of the most famous photographers, including Richard Avedon. And she loved Richard Avedon, but they did nearly come to blows on a photo shoot when he wanted to cut her fringe very short and she refused. She created an affordable clothing line which sold things like pointy-collared shirts, matching suits and waistcoats, wool skirts and utility jumpsuits and dresses. And she kept a sense of British value for money by making the clothing very affordable, even though by that time she could earn about £80 an hour just by modelling. And the clothing line was really successful. It sold about £1 million worth of clothing in the US and the UK. In 1967, she visited New York to work for Diane Freeland at American Vogue, and the whole thing was captured in a documentary by Bert Stern, and it captures amazing moments like the hype and the overwhelming crowds that met her at the airport. Alongside the American view, you saw kind of women in their Jackie O suits and pillbox hats, really overwhelmed by the British invasion. During this trip, Twiggy had a very uncomfortable interview with Woody Allen, who was an upcoming comedian at that time, and he asked her loaded questions about her favourite novel and her favourite philosophers, and his attempt to belittle Twiggy didn't actually work. It backfired because she then asked him the same question and he couldn't answer and just stormed off the set. Shockingly, Twiggy decided to retire from modelling in 1970, and she'd only been working as a model for 4 years at that time, but she said that the boredom was starting to show on her face during photo shoots. She said she's worked with everyone that she ever wanted to and would rather pursue musical theatre and film. Twiggy became great friends with director Ken Russell, and he introduced her to the world of film and European cinema when he hosted parties at his home. In 1969, there was a stage revival of the musical The Boyfriend, and it became Ken and Twiggy's absolute favourite after they went to watch it. And Ken came up with the idea that he wanted to recreate The Boyfriend with Twiggy playing the main role of Polly Brown. But Twiggy, she wasn't that confident of an actor or a singer, so she had to go and get some lessons. Twiggy was extremely hardworking. She worked day and night perfecting her skills, and everyone was absolutely blown away that she mastered these crafts in just 6 weeks. She also helped to cast the film by recommending Tommy Tune, who she had seen on American TV. And Tommy Tune would actually go on to be a big actor and director. So really, she was a very good talent scout. Twiggy loved the silver screen and she continued to work in film. She started to work on a film called W that was a psychological thriller, and this film would actually change Twiggy's life forever because she ended up marrying her co-star Michael Whitney, and they had a child together in 1978 named Carly. Twiggy continued to thrive as an entertainer during the 1980s, and she got a big break, which she calls the best achievement of her career, when she got to star in Broadway in The One and Only. And this was directed by Tommy Tune, who was now a very prestigious director. And Twiggy went on to be nominated for the Best Actress in the Musical at the Tony Awards, which is a massive achievement for her debut on stage. Although, in contrast to that, the 1980s was very difficult for Twiggy romantically. She left her now alcoholic husband in 1983, and then sadly he went on to suffer a heart attack. But luckily, she managed to finally find her soulmate when she was set up on a double date with Shakespearean actor Lesley Lawson, and the two married in 1988 and are still together to this day. Another iconic shoot happened in 1999, shot by Bridget Lacombe, and it featured Twiggy with Kate Moss, and the two had had very similar journeys as they had both been body shamed very early in their careers. Twiggy shared her concern that nobody should be trying to imitate the Twiggy body because this is the body of a child who went through rationing, and then she also had a disposition to be thin. It was in her genetics, and she stated very clearly that nobody over 20 could achieve the Twiggy body. In 2005, she began working as a judge on America's Next Top Model, which was a TV program hosted by Tyra Banks, which was also a modelling competition, and Twiggy liked to champion the smaller models as this was close to her heart, and Tyra called her a living legend and praised her expertise. Twiggy was also credited for saving British department store Marks and Spencer's as she revived her relationship with the brand after she had modelled with them in the 60s. She returned in their advertising campaigns at the age of 56. And she also launched a clothing collection in 2012, which sold out and helped them overcome their financial difficulties. And rightly, in 2019, she was given her damehood from the Queen for services to fashion, the arts and charities, as she had been a long-time supporter of animal welfare, cancer and children's charity. Twiggy is a British sweetheart. She's an icon and she's a living legend, and her name is known worldwide. Our national treasure, Twiggy. So we have come to the end of this video, and I will see you again in my follow-up video when we take a look at the 60s subcultures and styles. She contrasted the legacy of the 1950s housewife